My guests are Natasha Boyden, shipping analyst and expert at Cantor Fitzgerald, and we have Tim Coffin, who has worked in the merchant shipping industry and is now an investment manager at M2M Management Ltd. Tim, before we get to a specific stock, I know we want to talk about Star Bulk Carriers. Explain a little bit about some of the other ways, other than publicly traded companies, that investors can participate in the shipping industry. Can they actually buy individual ships?
Sure they can. Anybody can buy a ship. It's whether you can run it, which is the challenge. Typically, investors from outside of the shipping business invest in shipping in one of three different ways. The first obvious way is through public equities, and Natasha can talk about that. The other way is through bonds. We haven't seen too much bond activity recently, but about 10 years ago there was a big rush of shipping bonds. And otherwise through private equity vehicles. And frankly, that's the sort of the traditional way. I mean, ship owners have been doing it that way for hundreds of years. A group of merchants getting together and buying ship together.
Is it becoming more popular for people to actually band together in funds and buy individual ships?
There's a lot of activity right now which is focused on exactly that activity. I mean, we're seeing a lot of sort of so-called distressed assets funds entering the market because ships are at an apparent cyclical low. But more generally, we're seeing other types of finance being used to capitalize shipping businesses because, frankly, IPOs and bonds haven't worked as well as some people hoped.
All right. Well, Natasha, in fact, we've talked in the past this whole idea of the balance sheets of companies. Yes. That speaks to that very issue. If you've got a healthy balance sheet, at least then you're not sort of under the pressure of bank covenants.
And you're not at the mercy of either the equity capital markets or your banks.
Right. And you have the ability to take advantage of what Tim is describing as perhaps a little bit of a buyer's market. Talk a little bit about Star Bulk Carriers. Now, the interest there is the number of charter days, perhaps? I mean, how much do they have covered in 2010 so far?
They're pretty much about 80% covered. The other thing we like about it's a smaller company, so they have about 12 ships on the water. But they did have some real problems in the past, in 2009, with their charterers breaking contracts with them. And
they were in arbitration over those, aren't they?
They've been in arbitration. They still are with some of them. But they have rechartered a number of their vessels with really high-quality charterers, such as Vale. So we think a lot of that is behind them. And they really are, one of the companies that has a healthy balance sheet. 31% debt to cap, 3 times EV to debt to EBITDA. So
and good cash flow.
And good cash flow, around 60 to 70 million of cash flow. And lastly, which I think is important, they still pay a dividend. About 6%.
So you get paid while you wait for things to turn around.
That's one way of looking at it. Tell
me about what's going on at Navios Maritime Holdings, as symbol NM. This is different than the limited partnership. Yes. We've talked about that in the past as well. And the reason I bring it up is because they've actually raised some debt. And
they have.
As Tim was saying, that's one of the ways in which investors can participate. Tell me about the stock of Navios Maritime right now.
The stock of Navios is probably one of our favorites. They have a young fleet. And what Angeliki Frangou, who is the CEO, has done is she really has tapped some creative ways of financing. She actually did a bond, which I know Tim alluded to. She's done convertible preferred stocks. She's got credit facilities. So she's raised almost $1 billion in funds to really fund her new build program. She has 21 new builds coming on. So whereas Star Bulk doesn't have any new builds, this company does, and it's really a way to sort of participate in that growth, particularly as perhaps the cycle gets better and improves over 2011, 2012.
All right. Now you recently raised your rating on the stock. You've got an $8 price target on the shares right now. Is that considered an expensive multiple right now?
I don't think so. I mean, we have them about an 8 times EV to EBITDA multiple, which I think, given the strength of the management, given the fleet, given all of their relationships, they do deserve a premium to the group, which is around 7 times. If you look at Star Bulk, they're trading only at about 5 times, and it's more of a valuation play. So there's no reason for them to be trading down there, especially when their NAV is above $4.
Tim, talk about the concept of valuation right now, because indeed, if there is a market for ships and there are people with cash, are they getting discounts when they make an offer right now?
Well, it's awfully tough to price a ship right now. It's traditionally the way you price a ship is obviously off of earnings. You're not going to pay too many years more than other people will for the equivalent ship in terms of their earnings revenues. Right now, we've seen such a shock in the industry that nobody really knows what earnings are anymore. Are earnings going to go back up to 2007 levels within the next year or two? Who knows? It's impossible to say. A ship lasts 25 years. That's a whole set of different earnings that we don't know. We don't know what they're going to be.
But how long can the industry go along with this kind of question mark hanging over them?
That's a very good question, and one that we're all considering right now.
And so are we looking at, for example, a situation where there might be vulture investors who are waiting for companies to collapse? I mean, is that going to happen?
There are certainly people trying to do that. Whether we get to real distress levels or not, the market will tell.
Absolutely. There are definitely people waiting out there on the wings to swoop in.
Waiting. All right. Well, we'll have to wait with them. All right. I want to thank you both very much. Natasha Boyden coming in from Cantor Fitzgerald, Tim Coffin coming in from M2M Management. Appreciate your insight into the world of shipping.